God, for God's sake. Right. Hello and welcome everybody to this evening's meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. It's Wednesday, the 9th of March. It's just after 5:30. We do have an apology for absence, which is Councillor Fisher, who's unwell, and we wish him the very best for a speedy recovery. And Councillor Mason, who we don't have any indication of, but hopefully he will be with us soon and before the meeting ends. Agenda item 1, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest not already on your register? Nope. Cool. Agenda item 2 is the minutes. We have 2 sets of minutes to approve. The minutes of the 21st of January, which was held remotely. Are there? Oh, Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, Chair. At the beginning of those minutes, there is the statement about it being a remote meeting, and it says, decisions made by this committee recorded in these minutes are subject to approval by the Chief Operating Officer. Given that we're approving them in March, do we know that the decisions were approved by the Chief Operating Officer? And if we do, can we amend it to say that? Because it would be more sensible in terms of the public record of the meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good question. And I'm going to look to you now, Monitoring Officer.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm, there weren't actually any decisions arising from the meeting, and so therefore he wasn't asked to make any on behalf, because they were all requested to note, etc. So there were no formal decisions arising from the meeting on the 21st of January, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are there any factual corrections? I think not, in which case I'm happy to sign those as a correct record. Can I just borrow your pen, Robert? Oh, borrow that one then. So the second set of minutes are not quite so straightforward. These are from the 2nd of February, and there is a correction to those. Now, I'm going to ask the Monitoring Officer to explain why the original minutes as published in your papers weren't correct. And it's to do with the matters that are going to full council. Monitoring Officer.
Thank you, Chair. So at paragraph 72 or page 15 of the agenda, it says review of the Constitution. Given that the Audit and Governance Committee has referred the Constitution for consideration of adoption by full council on the 24th of March, there is a specific minute that we need to produce. It's called a Part B minute. That particular minute has been provided to members this evening. That is the minute which is the formal referral to full council. Therefore, I apologise that it was not included within the minutes when the agenda was published. But if members could be minded to confirm their agreement to the Part B minute, it is that document that will be shared with full council.
Now, I have a form of words. Can I do my form of words, and then we'll open it to discussion. Members, you will see that a revised minute in relation to our debate on the Constitution at the last minute in February has been circulated. It does not change or affect our decision in any way and is simply adjusted to make sure that the minute is presented in the proper way to facilitate referral of the Constitution to full council. And then can we approve the minutes of our February meeting subject to the revised Constitution minute before you? Now, Councillor Lomas.
Thank you. It's not quite on that aspect of it. I agree that is sensible. But just having reread the minutes, reflecting on the conversation that we had at the last meeting, and this is in relation to the new minute section 73 and the recommendation part C, which is about executive members and planning applications.
Yeah.
And I think the way that, from memory, it was getting quite late when we were discussing this, but the way that we expressed it doesn't quite capture what we were trying to get at, if that makes sense, because what we were trying to get at was that if somebody is an executive member who was party to the executive meeting where the project was voted on, they are predetermined in planning terms. So it may be that there might be an executive member who wasn't at the executive meeting where this mythical planning application was dealt with, and so I don't think we could say they were predetermined.
No.
But somebody who's already said in a meeting of executive whether they do or don't wish to see this progress is predetermined, and I just don't want us to end up putting something forward that doesn't really deal with what we were trying to deal with, because it's not that any executive member would be unable to participate.
Only ones that have voted.
It's executive members who are predetermined because they've already voted on the matter.
Thank you very much. I think that's, I think that was quite clear. Yes, please do.
Absolutely. So the following on from the debate of the committee on the 2nd of February, I have actually drafted 3 options and shared those with the chair for consideration to ensure that I did capture the 3 different views of the committee. So the 3, it was around Appendix 30, if you recall, which was the major projects conflicts protocol. There's actually 3 versions of that that's going to be presented to full council, giving the 3 options. One is as is now. So it is absolutely the status quo that executive members can sit on planning and can sit obviously on the executive. And it is for them to decide if they've got a conflict of interest or predetermination or not. The second option is there are no executive members whatsoever that sit on planning. It is as brutal as that, and that will have consequences for Appendix 17, which is the code of good practice for members who want to sit on planning. I think it's 17, I can't just remember. And then the third option is more that what you've just indicated, Councillor Lomas, is you either or. An executive member can sit on the executive, and that is where they express their view, they take a vote. However, they would be excluded from sitting on planning committee. Sounds simple. I'm trying to write that into a report at the moment, but whereas those options will actually be appended, my intention is that those options will actually be appended to the report for full council rather than just being part of the online mass of constitution so that they don't get lost. So the full council will be directed to choose option 1, option 2 or option 3. So because those are the 3 views that you wanted to put forward, and I have shared those with the chair. Yeah.
I'm going to go to Councillor Lomas. I think it's about these minutes that's the issue, but Councillor Lomas.
Thanks for that. That sounds really helpful, Janie. And when I was reflecting back on it, I don't think that we necessarily should change the minutes because I think the minutes do reflect where we came to in our discussion on that day. However, given a bit more time and brain space, I reflected that it might have been better to express it, and I don't know if this helps you, Janie, with the work you're trying to do now to make it make sense for the council papers, is that executive members who participate in decision-making on a project that will require planning permission at executive are considered to be predetermined when that project goes before planning committee and should absent themselves from the decision making at planning. So we're not saying executive members per se can't participate. We're saying if you've already had a go at voting for or against this, you don't get another go.
And effectively, that's what I've written. That is one of the options. I can't remember whether it's 1, 2 or 3, but it's one of the options. You will see it shortly, but it is one of the options. It is that you can't be on both. You can be on one, not the other, or you're not on any of them, or
status quo.
Status quo. So it is the three options, because I gleaned that from the debate, essentially, and it's quite hard to write in a minute, but I am, as the monitoring officer, I am going to put all three options forward.
And
Sorry,
then
just
I've
to
got Councillor
clarify,
Carr as well.
Yeah, I'll put it applicated.
It's not that you can't be on the committee, it's that you can't participate in the decision making on that particular item.
Yes, I think that is reflected, but I think that is reflected, but I think in practice, it is on the bigger issues, it's probably the advice from the planning lawyers would be, you know, there is already some subtle advice in how the constitution is currently drafted about which committee should take priority in essence in terms of code of conduct. I've tried to write that, but I think I'm just trying to be mindful of the monitoring officer actually in practice. It is sometimes easier to say you should just really choose one or the other. It does get quite muddy because people do test the boundaries. There's always that one application that just measures everything. So I'm just trying to put some frameworks around it. But we can have a look at that full council. Full council has the ability to completely rewrite the wording as well. Or do something completely different, or just not have any of them. And so it's the three options. But I'm Chair, if you wish, I'm happy to
debate at full
circulate
council.
the three options if you wish. But I have shared them, but I can circulate them after the meeting if members.
I think that might be helpful. Is that a supplementary to before I go to Councillor Carr?
Yeah, sorry, just so I've understood what we actually wrote in here was that one of the options going to full council would be that executive members would be eligible to sit on planning committees, but not deal with any matters. We didn't say not on executive. How can an executive member not sit on executive? It was about which items they'd be looking at in the planning committee. So, for example, if I was an executive member, I could be an executive member. I could also sit on planning committee. But if I had already at executive dealt with an item, I would have to withdraw from that item when it came before planning committee. So that's what we're trying to get to.
Chair, I have written that, but equally, you can, if you're an executive member, you can choose not to attend executive meeting if you prefer to have your vote at planning. So hence my kind of approach of either or, because the executive needs to be given the executive member needs to be given the option of, actually, I'd rather not sit on the executive and express my views voice there. I'd rather take up my seat on planning, for example. So I have to be mindful of that, I have to presume that they kind of give their apologies to executive because they prefer planning. Then I can't guarantee they're always going to prefer executive, for example. But I'm just having a look, and I think in essence, that's what I've written. I think we're saying the same thing. I'm probably just using slightly either or language to give an executive member the option of choose one.
I'm going to go to Councillor Carr, and then I think we'll probably draw. I've got Councillor Webb as well.
Thanks, Chair. I hate to labour this, but it's about the opposite case to which Councillor Lomas is referring. If a project is highly political and has engendered a lot of opposition, particularly from opposition parties, aren't they equally compromised? If they sit on planning committee, aren't they equally compromised by having predetermined their position on the planning aspects of a project which is very, quotes, political or contentious?
I'd really rather not rehearse the debate that's going to take place at full council, Councillor Carr.
Okay.
I think we could sit and debate this for another 2 hours.
I'm sure we could. Yeah.
But it is going to full council, and it will, and members will make their decision ultimately, and there will be a debate, and there will be the opportunity to.
Very well, Chair. I'll defer further comment until full council.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. My comment is on the same point, but it's more about the procedure. At the previous meeting, we discussed the idea that this body was putting forward a recommendation. And our recommendation was essentially the paragraph above the recommendations. Is that correct? Should council agree the executive member would continue to be eligible to sit on planning committees, that on any council application that goes before planning committee A, executive members would be unable to participate in that item. Now there's arguments around the wording that Councillor Lomas has made, but what we did was we said we would recommend one of what was at that point 2 options, the status quo or this option. That was essentially what's minuted here, and now the monitoring officer has now said that there's a 3rd option. And this might not be something to speak about in the minutes, but I thought it was easier to talk about that now. And just get a steer on how this committee could come up with a decision to have either that or that. And then subsequently, the monitoring officer has found a 3rd option.
I will go to you.
Okay,
I'm happy to
so
comment on that.
part of the discussion from memory on the 2nd of February also included the option of no executive members on planning whatsoever. As the monitoring officer, I'm also entitled to put my views forward because I am the custodian of the Constitution from an officer perspective. One of the cleanest, safest options around preventing conflict is that executive members do not sit on planning, full stop. So it is an option that I've put forward. I think it is an option that all members should be aware of, and it is the full vote then. It is on the 3 possible options. I've absolutely accommodated the views of the Audit and Governance Committee. I've worked with the chair of the Audit and Governance Committee on developing the 3 options so that I do accurately represent the views taken from the committee. But one of the debate items was there was no executive members on planning whatsoever. But as the monitoring officer, I think that if we're going to put the 2 options forward, the 3rd should be the cleanest, most stark option, which is executive members do not sit on planning. But some councils actually do have that. It's a discretionary issue and it's local for every council. So some councils do have in their constitution, executive members do not sit on planning. So, but I'm also entitled to put my recommendations forward in the constitution as well.
And as chair,
in terms of governance
and as chair, when I open this debate at full council, I will be reflecting the vote that this committee took and the recommendation that it took. That doesn't mean to say that it will be accepted, but that will be the recommendation that went forward from A&G. Sorry, go on.
I think it's important this though, because we now have we've got a council where you've got 47 members, and instead of having 2 things to vote for, there will now be 3 things to vote for. And you could have a point where you don't have a majority for anything. And I think that, for me, was why I thought it was quite clear you have an either or.
But as the monitoring officer has said, Councillor Webb, is in her opinion, and we are mindful that she is the holder of the Constitution and the Director of Governance, and I agreed that there should be a range of options for members to consider, and that would include no exec members, because it did form part of our.
I understand that. I know that, and if that is your decision, Chair, then I accept that.
Thank you.
Can I just clarify? There is a number of other votes that are going to be.
Oh, there
required.
are. Yes.
It's not just the votes on Appendix 30. There are also a number of other votes that are going to be required on the Constitution. So it is highly likely to be a lengthy item.
Yeah.
In its own right.
And we do need to make sure that, and I have made my views very clear, though it is in the gift of the Lord Mayor, who chairs that meeting, that I don't want this agenda item to go right at the end of the evening's proceedings, because we can't risk we can't risk a guillotine for a start, because this is the constitution, and it needs ratification, including all the different votes that we're going to have to take by full council. So, but I think those negotiations are taking place with the Lord Mayor. Yeah, thank you. The next agenda item is public participation. We have, oh, sorry, Councillor Lomas. Sorry, I'm glancing at the clock.
No, that's quite all right. It was a late thought. I just want to reflect on language, because I think language in this is going to be important, especially when we come to, as you quite rightly say, Chair, a lengthy debate with complicated votes. And I think where I was struggling with what you'd said, Janie, was you said you were talking about executive members not being able to sit on executive. And for me, that doesn't make any sense, because executive members sit on executive in that they are appointed to the executive. I think what we're talking about is they shouldn't participate in specific meetings of executive about specific items, rather than that we would have a weird situation where they would have to resign their executive.
I think that yes, I think it is the language, and I think that was the point that you are making in your recommendation. Not that they don't sit on executive at all. It's just
any member is free to give an apology to any meeting.
Yeah.
Absolutely, but I'm just saying, if you say, if in the wording that it's difficult because we haven't seen the wording that you're using to express this in the things that are going to be voted on at council, but if in that wording you say executive members should either sit on executive or on planning, that means they're either not on executive.
I think when you see the wording, it's made very clear
but that's really difficult, isn't it? Because we had wording and now that wording isn't what's being used. Yeah. So I think it's causing a lot of difficulty for us.
Yeah,
Chair, I think that's a fair point. It's a point of learning, really. If we're being asked to make a decision on something that then subsequently is changed, reworded, and other options are introduced, this committee, as Audit and Governance Committee, should have sight of that.
Yeah.
Chair, can I just remind the committee, I'm a statutory officer, I am the custodian of the Constitution. If in my opinion, I need to put something forward to full council and following on from recommendations of this committee, because it either adds to or it provides the fullest options, I will do that in my statutory capacity, Chair. I do have that lawful ability to do that. I take into account, I have consulted with you. I feel that I've reflected the wishes of this committee, but I am ultimately legally entitled to put my views forward and my opinions forward to ensure that all members can make a fully informed decision, and that is what I'm doing.
Accepted, yeah. Right, I'm going to move on because it's now 6 o'clock and the public participant has been waiting for over half an hour. Mr. Mendes, are you able to join us via Zoom?
I hope so, Michael.
Ah, perfect, yes. Well, you are our only public participant this evening, and I believe you wish to speak on matters within the remit of this committee, specifically the Treasury Management agenda item. So please start when you'd like. Okay.
First, may I apologise for not being with you in person. The agenda is such that I thought that the meeting would be very quick. At 7:30, well, you're working on it already, but at 7:30, you'll no doubt be proving me wrong again. Anyway, I'm not with you, I'm here. So my comments, nevertheless, will reflect the shortness of this agenda, so I won't detain you long. Every year I make the same points about the Treasury report. The silliness of only including committed capital in the expenditure forecasts for the later years in the plan, and the implications on council tax bills for the steady increase in debt repayments, again rising to a predicted above 20% in 2026-27, even given the unrealistic capex forecasts. And every year Debbie explains that she's only allowed to include committed capex and that there's an expectation that council tax receipts would rise as the city grows, so the 20% won't come to. So I'm not going to mention them this year. What I would like to challenge is the PWLB interest rate forecasts in the paper. Even before Ukraine, these seem to me to be ridiculously low, Indeed, they're even wrong for March 2020, as far as I can see, because I see a base rate of 0.5, not 0.25. I even wonder if these figures are influenced by national political rather than financial considerations. Heaven forfend that this government would be economical with statistics, but it doesn't seem to me to make economic sense. So, questions for Debbie. Does CYC have to take the government figures for its calculations? And what does Debbie really expect interest rates to be in, say, 2024? And then in previous conversations, Debbie's always taken the view that borrowing should be sufficient to meet foreseen and foreseeable needs and be spread across short and long-term debt. I wonder whether she and CYC are now seriously considering increasing their cash balances ahead of likely inflationary pressures. If you were offered, members, if you were offered a 25-year mortgage at a fixed 1.9%, wouldn't you take it today? You could indeed today invest this money in a 5-year fixed savings account and get 2.1%. Shouldn't CYC? And my final question for you, Michael, or for Debbie or whoever, is Treasury policy ultimately a political or an officer decision? That's my lot. Have a fun evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, I think there's some very relevant questions there. And I'm sure we will cover a number of them when we get onto that agenda item. Have a good evening, Andy, and we'll hopefully see you at the next meeting.
Well, if I'll keep going as long as you tell me, I hope. Cheers.
Okay, take care.
Thanks.
So we now move on to the substantive agenda items. Agenda item 4, which is scrutiny of the Treasury Management Strategy Statement and the Prudential Indicators. Long title, long explanation, I suspect.
Well,
Debbie,
yeah.
Section 151 Officer.
Thank you. So this is a statutory report that's required to be considered by you by the Prudential Code. It's here for you to consider in your scrutiny role. You'll be aware it's already been to executive and full council. The main thing to draw your attention to is that there is a change to the minimum revenue provision policy, but otherwise there are no significant changes to the strategy to bring to your attention.
Debbie, could you speak up?
Could I what? Sorry,
Speak up.
Sorry. I'm so used to just talking to myself, clearly. Forget there are people here. Yeah, so the policy change has been included following a review by our independent Treasury management advisors, the Link Group, and they've done a review of our current policy to make sure it's fit for our current and future spending plans. And the review has allowed us to reduce our financing costs in a way that ensures the provision remains prudent and compliant with the statutory guidance. So we're still working through the implications of the revised Prudential Code, and we'll bring further updates on that as appropriate throughout the year. In terms of the comments from the public speaker, I'll respond to those as I can. That Mr. Mendes is correct. We do only include the committed capital expenditure. With the best will in the world, I cannot get out my crystal ball and determine what this council's capital expenditure is going to be for the next administration, and that wouldn't be prudent or sensible to do that. So we follow the policy and the guidance and the law on that. Again, the ratio of debt is increasing as debt increases. However, we have reviewed our MRP policy, and you'll have seen hopefully in the budget reports that there was a saving of £2 million per annum. That links to the MRP policy review. That's how we've delivered that saving. That means that our financing costs are reducing, and therefore that ratio will reduce. So it does change all the time. We've reduced our capital financing costs, so the ratio reduces. It still increases over the 5-year period because debt still increases over the 5-year period. So just to make that point. In terms of the PWLB and the interest rate forecast, if I could tell you what interest rates were going to be in 2024, you wouldn't be able to afford me, I guess, because I would be doing something else. You know, given everything that's going on at the moment, I don't mean to sound flippant, but quite honestly, your guess is as good as mine at this point in time. So we do our best and we rely on our Treasury management advisors, and they might be wrong and they might be right, but all we can work on is the information that we've got available to us. And finally, in terms of, again, understand the point that the public speaker was making. You could lock in your mortgage 25 years at a low interest rate, you would. But not if you didn't need a mortgage, you wouldn't. You wouldn't go out and borrow for a mortgage if you didn't need to buy a house. The council, public sector legally cannot borrow to invest. So we absolutely cannot go out and borrow £20 million at 2% to invest it at 5%. That's illegal. We're not allowed to do that. So again, we do what we can in terms of taking out debt at the appropriate time for the council. So we took out 5 million yesterday because rates had been low. They crept up a couple of points yesterday. So we took out 5 million. They've crept up again today. So we're probably going to take another 5 to 10 million tomorrow, just because they are starting to creep up. So we are going to take advantage of the borrowing rates while they are relatively low. But there's a balance on that, because obviously as soon as you take on the borrowing, then you've got to start servicing the interest. So there is a cost of carry. So it's trying to get the money at the right time. We know we need 15 to 20 million within the next month or so. So instead of waiting until the end of the month, we're going to take that now because we think it's going to be more expensive at the end of the month. So that's a sort of daily debate that we have. So we do our best on that, really. Do you want me to go on to talk about the Russian investments, or do you want?
Well, let's see if it comes up. I mean, if nobody else asks, I will ask about that. But I've just got a question on your presentation there. You say that forecast of where interest rates are going to be is an inexact science, but we do hire an organisation to do that work for us. That's Link. But on page 47, you've very helpfully put an alternative organisation, Capital Economics, who've made a different set of forecasts as to where interest rates are. How do we, and how do you as the Section 151 Chief Finance Officer say, well, actually, I think Link are being overly conservative, and we've got these other forecasters that are saying interest rates are going to be higher, therefore we have to tailor our strategy, our borrowing strategy in that. How does that work?
Well, we would generally look and try and take a midpoint between the two. If one is slightly more cautious, one a little bit more bullish, we would look and just see between the two. I think the thing is that there's not a lot of difference in terms of pounds at the end of it. I haven't got the numbers in front of me, but in terms of those rates, an increase in PWLB rates, if they click at 1 or 2 basis points, it's not a huge sum of money in terms of the new borrowing. So the borrowing that we've already got, so the debt we already carry, it doesn't affect that at all. That's all taken out at a fixed rate. So if interest rates change, it doesn't matter to us. We still pay the same. It's only taking on new borrowing and the rate that we take that on. And there's not that much difference between the two. So it's, yeah, we just take what we think is the middle route, really.
Thank you. Members. Councillor Carr.
Thanks, Chair. Debbie, on this issue of borrowing money to invest at high rates, we can do that with income-producing assets, can't we?
Well, you can buy properties for investment purposes, but you can't use PWLB money to do that. So you can't borrow to do that. You've got to use your own resources. Yes, you used to be able to, but you can't anymore.
So on page 33, Debbie, you've got our estimated projected debt. Our gross projected debt is 390 million. And in 2026-27, you've estimated it to be 544.9 million. So if you're able to make that estimation of that's the level of borrowing over the next 3-4 years that we're likely to need. Why could you not borrow that now before interest rates go up and the PWLB rate goes potentially skywards as inflation rises?
You can borrow in advance of need. So you could borrow, but then you've got the cost of carry. So you would start, so you'll recall again, we put around 1.5 million into the Treasury budget, or we have done for the last few years, to cover the cost of borrowing, because we assume that we will take out an amount of borrowing every year rather than taking it all in one lump sum. So the Treasury budget can't afford to take out all that borrowing now, because we'd need to add in, because we'd have to start paying the interest.
Yeah.
And we haven't got the budget for that. We'll build that budget up over the years.
Okay, so, but if interest rates were to, as inflation rises, and we've seen some really quite sobering forecasts for where inflation might be by Q3. I mean, I read some research today that says by Q3 2022, we could be looking at between certainly 8%, and some forecasts are as high as 10% inflation. What might that effect be on how we then borrow for the rest of this financial year and moving forward? Because rates are going to then have to rise, aren't they?
Well, potentially. I mean, it will depend on a number of things, won't it? You know, I'm not an economics expert, so it will depend on what the government does and how the government responds to that. So they could do something around gilts and bonds, which will affect interest rates, will affect the rates at which we can borrow. We already get, so the PWLB rate that you might see published, if you're the sort of person that checks those kind of things, I'm assuming that you're not. So we get what's called the certainty rate. So we get a discount of that. If you're borrowing for infrastructure, you get a different rate again. So the government has various levers that they can pull to make borrowing cheaper for local government if they wanted to do that. So it would depend certainly on what the government's reaction is, how they will respond to the rising inflation. If inflation does go up to 10%, then obviously we'll have a host of other financial concerns as well. So, you know, we have made provision for inflation in our budget, but we haven't made provision for 10% inflation in our budget. So there could be another £6 to £8 million worth of cost in revenue on things like our social care contracts, on our other contracts, leisure centres, and you know, that kind of thing. We will also see a rising cost of capital schemes. So presumably the cost of building materials would continue to increase. So we'd have to then look again at the capital programme and the schemes that are in there, whether they would be affordable still, because we wouldn't necessarily be able to just keep borrowing indefinitely. We wouldn't be able to afford to. There would be a cap eventually on what we could afford to borrow.
So as part of the Treasury management, do you make a calculation of where you think inflation will be by Q4, essentially?
We don't know. We look at what the capital programme is. We assume that when the capital programme is being put together, so when managers are budgeting, that they will factor in you know, the rising prices, if that's appropriate or relevant to them. But quite honestly, if you know, if prices rise, the schemes will have to be value engineered or restricted in some way, because we're going to have to cut our cloth accordingly, aren't we? So if prices continue to increase, we'll have to stop doing things, essentially.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Webb.
This might be a cruel question, but what interest rate percentage do you start to sort of, when do the alarm bells really begin?
In terms of?
Well, I mean, we talked there about the fact that it's whatever it is today in the papers, and 10%, you know, obviously from this committee's point of view, is there has to come a point where we think, right, we need to look at this directly at this point, and you need to speak to us or whoever, the executive, whoever. When does that happen and why?
I think that will happen within the first quarter, because as soon as we've done the outturn and we know what this year's position is, and we know what pressures we're carrying forward into the new financial year, we know what budget savings need to be achieved, we know what we've got in for growth, So April, May, June, we will then look and make sure, see what's happening with inflation, because I think April was the energy price increase, isn't it?
Yes,
So we'll start to see, and so certainly by the end of the first quarter, if things are continuing on this trajectory at the moment, which is that it's likely to increase, then we'll probably make some sort of comment and recommendation in the finance and performance monitoring report for the first quarter, which I think will be scheduled for executive in sort of July or August. So certainly at the end of the first quarter.
If the cost of living rises impact on the revenue we have coming in, how does that impact on Treasury strategy?
Yeah, well, that'll impact our cash flow. So that might mean that we have to borrow earlier than we are forecasting. We haven't got too much debt redeeming, I don't think, next year. So we haven't got too much to refinance. We would have to borrow probably slightly earlier than we forecast. So that would be increased interest rate costs.
And talking of refinancing, if we were to refinance our debts at the current rates that we're able to borrow at, what stops us from doing that?
Yes, because if we repay a loan early, we have to pay what's called the premium. So you're right. Some of our debt that was taken out in the kind of early 2000s and the late 90s is at 4.5%, and we can borrow at I think 2.2, 2.4. But we would have to pay a premium if we wanted to redeem that debt early, and that cost of that premium would wipe out any interest savings that we might make.
No, that's helpful. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lomas.
You okay?
Yes.
Thank you. I'd just be interested, Debbie, for your view on Mr. Mendes's last question, which was, is Treasury management fundamentally a political or an officer decision? And that's purely for interest.
Well, I would say it's both, as politically sets the overall strategy, but officers make the day-to-day decisions within that strategy framework. So the Treasury Management Strategy Statement sets out that broad overarching policy, the countries we can invest in, what we can invest in, how much we can invest in each counterparty. And then within that framework, officers make the decisions. So I make all the day-to-day decisions based on this Treasury Management Strategy Statement. It's all in accordance with this strategy. I recognise that it's not the easiest thing in the world to understand. And, we keep looking at ways we can try and make it a bit clearer. But we can't. Honestly, we do look at it and think, how can I explain this in a way that makes sense to the normal person? But we tie ourselves up in knots, to be quite honest with you. So, yeah.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, Debbie, it may have taken nearly 3 years, but I think I do understand it a bit better now than I did back in 2019. So it is appreciated that you work so hard to try and help us work out our way through this. And I suppose following on from, is it political or is it an officer decision? It would be helpful, I think, to just have that further information about Russian investments that you've indicated you had. I think that would be useful.
Yeah. So what we've done, I think the council did a press release either last week or early in the week about contracts. What we've been doing is looking at whether or not we hold any contracts or investments with any Russian or Belarusian companies. We don't have any investments with Russia or Belarus. That's not one of our countries on our approved list of countries. We only invest in sterling anyway. We don't invest in foreign currency. So we certainly don't hold any investments. We've reviewed our contract register and supplier list, and we don't hold any contracts either with any Russian or Belarusian companies. We're not one of the councils that buys our energy from Gazprom. We do have some Russian businesses registered on the Your Tender procurement portal, which means that there are those companies that potentially could bid for council contracts. But actually anybody can register. It doesn't mean to say that they're necessarily going to bid, and it's a national and regional portal. So they may well be bidding on other councils' contracts. We certainly haven't had any bid on our contracts. I've also checked with colleagues at North Yorkshire County Council about the North Yorkshire Pension Fund, and again they have confirmed that the pension fund doesn't have any direct investments in Russia or Belarus. They think they have potentially less than 0.1% of funds that may have some exposure to Russia through fund managers, and so they're doing a bit of a deep dive into exactly whether that is the case. So it might be exposed, doesn't necessarily mean to say it's invested, but they are very small. And as I understand it, there's no ability to currently trade on the Russian stock market at the moment. So if there was some exposure, I don't think you could actively disinvest at this point, because I don't think the Russian stock market's trading. So, but North Yorkshire are continuing to look into that.
That's really helpful. Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Chair. Debbie, something that did catch my eye at the bottom of the table on page 29 is the financing requirement for PFI and public-private partnership schemes. Can you give me a couple of examples of where we are invested on that basis, please?
Yeah, the only PFI schemes we've got are at schools, sorry, there's the school and there's the Allerton Park Waste. Sorry, is the other one. They're the two. The school one, I think it's an academy now, isn't it? That Hobmoor. Is it Hobmoor? I think that is an academy now. But the other big one is Allerton Waste.
Right. So it's not West Officers, for example. That doesn't. No, okay.
No, it's just those two.
Thank you.
Thank you. If there aren't any other questions, I mean, that's incredibly interesting. And I would just say for people that are watching, if there is anybody that is suitably qualified as an accountant, or what are the qualifications that you need to be an independent member of this committee to consider the financial side?
So the Redmond review suggests that you will have an accountancy qualification.
Accountancy qualification. So if there is anybody with an accountancy qualification that would like to join us for future meetings, to be able to question Debbie and the financial strategy, please do get in touch. By all means, contact myself or the monitoring officer, and you'd be very, very welcome. So, if that's the end of that discussion, thank you very much, Debbie, as always. We'll move on to agenda item 5, which is progress against the action plan, which is the monitoring officer.
Thank you, Chair. This is our regular update on the progress against the action plan. And as we've already debated, the Constitution is going to full council on the 24th of March, now that you've approved the minutes. Work does continue, however, it doesn't mean that everything has stopped. So we're currently working with HR around the rollout of the new Officer Code of Conduct, which has been drafted following the adoption of the LGA Member Code of Conduct. And that's been with a collaborative process with the trade unions. So we're working on that. We're putting together the sort of more detailed foundations of a member development program for launching from May 2023. And so we're looking at that. We're currently looking at a training program for officers as well as members on the Constitution. And obviously it's different audiences, so there is a different training required. And we're currently working as well with members of the CMT to look at implementation of the Constitution should it be agreed by full council, particularly schemes of delegation, decision making, understanding of decision making, and alongside that as well is reviewing our templates, our report templates, to make sure that there's a consistent approach and the implications are correctly recorded. Also working with Joint Standards Committee, as well as Councillor Carr will be aware, because Joint Standards Committee has recommended revised procedures to support the follow through of complaints once they're received. So the revised procedures will then mirror more accurately the model code, which was adopted in October. So we're working on those and their implementation should full council agree them as well, because they've been recommended as part of the Constitution as well. So there's quite a lot of work ongoing. It is, obviously, we're working towards supporting the LGA as well, because they should be, as we look at later in our draft work plan, coming back in the summer. We haven't got a date yet, but they're coming back in the summer. And so we're awaiting further correspondence from them. I'm aware that the peer team has met, but I've not received any formal communication from them.
Yeah, cool. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Janie, for that update. I do think that was really, really helpful. You've got to admit that the paper that is in front of us is limited on detail compared to what you've just told us. And I know that previously we've had basically a list of the things you've just mentioned, and it's been who's responsible for that. Has it been done? Has it not been done? And I'm just thinking from a member of public's point of view, and this is about the public interest report, the fact that that has not been written down and included in the papers, I think is quite unhelpful. And I was wondering if we can just make it clear that from future that we have that list each time. I think we did have it at a previous meeting, didn't we? We sort of listed the different things that were going to be done and why they need to be done. Because in here, for example, all we have got is the thing about the Constitution. And as we've discussed many times, that is, of course, going to help a very small part of the public interest report. But, you know, the fact that there's a line in there, these issues include the role of executive members at planning committees. But then there's nothing about the fact that it was due to declaring interests, which I think, again, is slightly misleading, really. And I think, I'm sure it wasn't meant like that, but I think it would be a lot clearer if we just had that list that we can then hold people to account to on a more regular basis. And if that was consistently done, I think that would really help us. Thank you.
Yeah. I think that's
I'm being careful not to preempt the decision of full council. No. Full council may choose not to accept the new constitution. It's a vote, so it's gone for approval. So I am being careful, but at the moment, it is a plan in place. I'm still in the process of kind of owning everything myself as well, with Debbie and Helen Whiting at the moment. And so when I have confirmed things and firmed things up, I will absolutely bring an update, a more detailed update. But at this moment in time, it's quite non-specific, but the plans are in place and they will develop and they will grow, particularly after March.
And of course, this doesn't end.
No, it doesn't end. It's continuous.
After March, you know, we will keep looking at it. Councillor Webb first, and then Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, Janie. I think you might have misunderstood me there. I think there is a plan. We've seen it before. What I want to be able to do is to scrutinise how we've achieved against that plan. And I can't do that because that's not here. And it's just a case of, and we know there's a plan, we've seen it before. So it's just a case of like having that in the papers is all I'm asking for. And bits of it you will have achieved, bits of it you won't have achieved. And of course it's ongoing. So it's just, yeah, that's okay. Do you want to bring it to the next meeting?
It's much easier for me to bring a more meaningful updated plan after the next meeting, because then I'll know the view of full council of...
The view of full council on the Constitution is one part of...
It is, but there's quite a lot of elements. The action plan on the public interest report is actually a lot of elements. So it's around the Officer Code of Conduct, it's around the revised work of Joint Standards Committee, and it's the Constitution is like the catch-all of all of the different functions. So for the next meeting on the 6th of April, I can absolutely bring the updated version of the action plan, because we'll know whether full council's adopted the views of Joint Standards Committee on the procedures, whether they've accepted the new Officer Code of Conduct, which is around officer conflicts. There's a new member officer protocol, which Joint Standards Committee have looked at, got the clear way forward or the sense of direction in terms of the member conflicts around planning. And I can bring something
yeah,
more
I am aware of that. We saw that plan. But there were parts of it that didn't have really relevance to the Constitution. And it's just missing in my opinion. But
okay. I mean, we'll bring it, yeah. Councillor Lomas.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think that exchange has partly covered what I was going to say. What I was going to say was, in response to the public interest report, an action plan was developed. It would be, I think, the most helpful way to have these progress reports would be to have the action plan as it was originally presented, with just an extra column added that had either has been achieved or work still ongoing, or there are problems with this and we need to consider it further, or wording to that effect. But I think that would be the most helpful way to present further reports on progress, is to just replicate the original with an extra column on our progress against it. Because I have to say, when I read the papers for this meeting, I was really concerned that the report would suggest that the only item that is being progressed at the moment is the Constitution. And I know that's not the case, because I know you've talked about it at previous meetings, and I know work is happening. In your kind of verbal update, you've given us two things that are also happening. And it would be, I think, the easiest thing to just present every time that action plan with an extra column on it.
And we'll record that into the minutes.
It's much easier if we can
want to
get
do.
through full council. It'll be much easier to do that, because everything is dependent on the decision of full council at the moment. So, for example, the exit strategy document that has been through SMU, the scheme of delegation includes all of the decision-making responsibilities in the Constitution. So it's all kind of ties in. So yes, I'm very happy to bring that updated chart on the 6th of April. That's not a problem.
And for future meetings. Yeah.
Sorry. I'm not suggesting that I wanted to see tonight something with everything ticked off. I absolutely accept there are lots of interdependencies. There will be things that it will take quite some time to get to, completion of. But we need to be able to see that work is happening. And that's the important thing, I think, and for members of the public to see that work is happening. So that's why it's important. And I think where there are interdependencies with, for example, we can't finalise this until the Constitution is approved, then that is also valuable, helpful information to understand.
Yeah, I think it's a point well made. And so for future meetings, and if we could record that was the will of the group, that's perfect, lovely. Are there any other excuse me? Are there any other questions on this agenda item 6? Nope. So we shall then move to that was agenda item 5, sorry. Agenda item 6, which is the work plan. And this agenda item is only till the end of this municipal year. So it's just the meeting of the 6th of April.
So yes, that's correct. It's our final meeting of the municipal year.
Yeah.
And this is the current topics.
Is there anything that's on there that shouldn't be on there? Is there anything that's not on there that you would like to see at the? It's quite a chunky agenda item, agenda for the 6th of April. So if everybody's happy with that as the set agenda, then we shall move on and accept that. And then we move into the draft work plan for the next financial year, which will be our final year of this electoral cycle, when our responsibilities will come to an end. Now, you'll see from this that there's markedly less meetings penciled in than we've had in the last certainly the last 12 months and probably the last 24 months. And Janie and Debbie will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this last year we had something like 13 Audit and Governance Committee meetings. You know, on more than one occasion we had 2 a month. You know, only beaten by CSMC, who like to have weekly committee meetings, but we have, I believe, got 6 meetings forecast, penciled in for the coming year, but that does not mean to say 5. We have 5 meetings penciled in, but that does not mean to say that that we accept that, and that's why this is a draft and a draft only. But I would be really interested in colleagues' views as to the agendas, potential agendas, though they can't be fixed at this stage, and the number of meetings that we've got in. So I will ask Janie or Debbie to if they've got any comment on this.
My only comment is that we're not able to provide any specific dates as yet. Those are still being worked through with Democratic Services. Debbie and I have worked on this together. These are the items which do need to come to the committee during the course of a municipal year. So we've tried to group them in terms of appropriate themes together to give a bit of coherence for each meeting.
Yeah. So, Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. I think, you know, we had loads of meetings this year because we had a lot of constitution stuff to argue over, and various other public interest reports, things like that. I wonder if we stick with what we have here at agenda item 7. But if you do remember, when we got to a particular point, we sort of had a discussion that we probably needed an extra meeting putting in. Now, I'd be happy with that situation if officers were happy with that situation, where we stick with what we got, and if we get to later in the year and think we do need something additional, then fine. My only concern in terms of the agenda would maybe be around October, because it's a big one, and there's a lot of stuff that we want to do right on that, in that. It's the final account, stuff like that. So the October one's my only concern from having a look at it. But I wonder if we stick with what we've got, and if we need it, add something in, if that's possible.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's really helpful. Does anybody else have any views on that suggestion? Councillor Lomas.
Yeah, I would also share the view that October looks like the most challenging agenda to achieve, and that potentially my suggestion would be that we see where we are when we have our June meeting and make a decision there as to whether we need an additional meeting ahead of October to either pull forward some things from that into a sooner, I don't know if that's the right language, but a sooner meeting than October, but happy to, you know, take it as we go. I think I would say, though, if we are adding additional meetings in, the sooner we can decide that and get dates, the better, because one of the, I suppose, challenges when we're now back in face-to-face meetings is it is more difficult to plan in.
Yes, absolutely.
Around other commitments. So that's the only drawback in doing that, but happy to go with that suggestion.
Debbie.
Yeah, I think what we'll need to bear in mind is, obviously we've not got the actual dates yet for the new municipal calendar, and some of these things, so we've experienced it, haven't we, this year with the auditors and not being ready with the accounts, and that's another reason why we've had to kind of shuffle things around a bit. So, you know, this is an aspiration. This is when we would like to have things done. If our colleagues were here from Mazars, they might sort of slap me around the head and say there's no chance we're going to be ready with the accounts in October, get it in November. I mean, so there's that kind of thing. And also some of the things, so the Treasury management mid-year review, for example, I mean, it will go to executive, so it will be published. So, you know, we could move that to December and there really wouldn't be a problem because you would get to see the information anyway. So I think we will have to have a bit of flexibility between meetings because some of this is we can't control. So like I say, whilst I'd love to bring the accounts in October, if Audit are not ready, then I won't be able to bring them in October. So that, just to bear that in mind, really.
Councillor Wan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think Debbie's answered most of the question. It was about the external auditor process, because over the 3 years that some of us have sat on this committee, things have moved around quite a lot. Where are we at the moment with external audit? What's the advice from the government on when things must be done?
Well, we haven't yet actually had an official confirmation that we can extend the close down timetable. So as it stands at the moment, the draft accounts have to be with you and with the auditors by the 31st of May. We do expect them to extend that again to the 31st of July. I mean, that might have come out in the last couple of days, but it's kind of 99% certain that they will extend it to July. We just haven't had that confirmation yet. So we are working on that assumption, actually, and auditors are working on the assumption that they've got until November to sign them off. So that's kind of wait and see.
So, for example, you're confident that the draft accounts will be ready for June?
Yeah, we've got to get on with the budget. We can't still be doing the accounts in July. We haven't got the resources to do that. If we don't do it by sort of late May, mid-June, we need to be getting on with New Year stuff. I say this all the time, the accounts are important, but they're essentially a backward-looking document. They don't really tell you that much.
No, moving forward, no.
We need to be concentrating, So yeah, we need to do it by then, because we haven't got the capacity to drag it over too long a period. Right,
so Janie, from a democratic services perspective, if after we have our June meeting and we feel that October is looking heavy, is there going to be scope, for example, to factor in a September meeting?
I can't possibly comment on that because we're still developing the corporate calendar for next year. So I don't know, for example, if Councillor Webb, Councillor Lomas are going to be free a lot or busy a lot in September because the dates are just not available. And also this annual council is on the 26th of May. So we also have to look at who's appointed to sit on which committee as well. That goes into the factor post May. You'll also have to look at room availability, which is the most difficult factor actually. And we always keep Fridays free.
Yeah.
I hate to say that. I know Councillor Webb, you looked up, but there is always a Friday night, and we try not to have any meetings on a Friday night. But to be fair, when you're delivering the corporate calendar, in terms of room availability at last minute or with short notice, it nearly always will be a Friday, or you can have a daytime meeting. And I know again that is problematic as well.
If you want to meet in the daytime, go for it. Friday is not fair on staff.
Agree, absolutely agree, but it's just too early to answer your question, I'm afraid. I think if it got to June meeting and you wanted something, say, in November, because I know previously there's been some discussion about you prefer a meeting in November, that might be slightly easier than bringing a meeting forward, if that makes sense. So it gives democratic services a little bit more, slightly more flexibility, but there's so many unknowns.
So what do you all think then, Councillor Lomas?
Just listening to that, Janie, totally accept that, you know, you can't read into the future any better than Debbie can. But I wonder if we would be better trying to plan in a meeting, say, in September and a meeting in November, and then we can cancel one, rather than waiting until we get to June and then saying, oh heck, we need an extra meeting, because I
was
wouldn't-
coming to the same conclusion.
Yeah.
To be honest, I was
'Cause-
coming to the same
'cause
thoughts myself.
when you look at the spread of meetings, if you like, we've got June and then October and December. And I wonder if some of the things, so it's likely to be the accounts that will be moved later, if they need to be moved, and other things could be done potentially, like I'm sure some of the internal audit, key corporate risks monitor could be moved to September potentially. So we could almost split that agenda item out to September and November. Bearing in mind we could cancel one of those meetings if we end up not needing it and put it all back together again.
Yeah. Councillor Carr, did I see your hand?
No, Chair, no, I've
No.
no remarks to make on this.
I mean,
Thanks.
my thoughts, for what it's worth, are that I think we should pencil something in at this stage. Whether it's a September meeting or whether it's a November meeting or whether it's a September and a November meeting, that would leave us September, October, November with the potential to cancel one of them. I think the likelihood is if we were going to cancel anything, it would probably be the September one, because my recollection of November meetings is we end up doing the accounts. And I think we'd probably be better off factoring a November meeting in, and then and I mean, we can always move agenda items forward from the October meeting into September just to make it shorter. And it's a more manageable time management process. Councillor Lomas.
Sorry, Chair, are you suggesting then that we'd have October, November and December meetings?
Well, that's what I think we've ended up with in previous years. Now, if we would then have September, October, November, December, and potentially a January stroke February, which is exactly where we've been for the last 2 years. That number.
So I'm not sure why we'd have all of those though.
No, I don't think we need.
That's what
I'm saying. I think if we were going to have one, history tells us November.
Pencil in some dates for September and November, but don't put anything on the forward on the work plan. And we try, as officers, we will try and, as much as possible, try and keep you to time almost, and keep you to those meetings, and then that gives you the flexibility that should things change,
Of dropping one of them.
you can drop them and you can move them around, and then, you know, because I mean, we shouldn't really be meeting every month, should we, as an audit and governance committee? Shouldn't require to meet every month.
But I think,
times a year,
I think rather than try to almost put an emergency one in,
so we
I think it's better to have it at this stage
November, but we don't put any
before the
items on
municipal year
plan.
starts. And then you've got the option of cancelling. Yeah? Is everybody happy with that? So basically stick one a month in and we'll just cancel them as we go along. Yeah. Marvellous. I don't think we've got any other urgent business. So I'm happy to call this meeting to a close, and thank